As Scott passed the city limits scene, he looped his forefinger around the knot of his tie to loosen it. He sucked in a deep breath of air, released it slowly through his mouth, and felt the tension of a hectic week easing from his neck and shoulder muscles. Friday afternoons were always good. They were even better when they preceded spending Friday night in Dory Carroll's bed. The rush traffic has thinned into the usual highway stream. Scott pressed his foot a little heavier on the gas pedal of his Mercury Cougar and switched on the cruise control. An expression of contentment that was not quite a smile softened his lips. A 90-minute tape of carefully selected songs was reeling through the stereo tape deck, filling the car with his favorite music. He gave a few fleeting taps to the term project he'd assigned and to one student who was trying hard but was still in danger of failing senior accounting. Then let his mind wander to the woman who was waiting for him 150 miles down the road. Dory, short for Isadora. Her parents had named her after Isadora Duncan, but she had had absolutely no aptitude for ballet, nor had she inherited her mother's musical talent the way her sister had. Her propensity was the same as her father's, the law. John Milford Carroll was a district judge, and Dory herself was in the process of building a prestigious law practice. They had met 3 years earlier on a one-day cruise out of Port Canaveral. Scott had signed up for the excursion because he didn't have anything better to do, but he had not envied the date. Tired of playing singles games and burned out on the dating ritual in general, he had gone alone. Without realizing, he was hoping something unexpected and magical, and yes, even romantic enough to impress a hardened veteran of the dating game would happen. He had not known he was searching for romance when he wandered to an isolated deck to escape reggae music and the hungry, hopeful looks of young women shopping for male meat on the roof. He had thought he was seeking fresh air and peace, which he found. He also found Dory. She was standing with her hands on the railing, her head tossed back so that the brisk breeze swept over her face and swirled her hair back into a wild froth of curls. The wind was blowing her clothes, compressing the soft knit of her shirt against her breast and lifting the sides of her matching culotte. Scott stood for a long while just looking at her. He found her sexually attractive, but the attraction was more than purely physical. He tried to remember how long it had been since he had been so intrigued by a woman, but could not. In addition to the decidedly carnal urges he got each time the wind lifted her culotte to grant him a glimpse of her upper thigh. He felt an intense desire to hear the sound of her voice, to see how her face would change when she smiled. He moved to the railing, tilted his own face into the wind, sucked in a deep draught of sea air, and said, "Now this is why you take a cruise." She agreed, her voice rich and sweet as wild honey. She turned her face toward his, their eyes met, and she smiled. Then, standing side by side, they turned their gazes back to the sea and let the sun warm their faces. A brief exchange, a long, comfortable silence, and unspoken agreement about what was important in life. Such a simple beginning. But they were both already aware that what had begun would last beyond the ship's docking an hour before midnight. The next time Dory spoke to him, it was to ask if his cheeks were normally so pink and offer him sunscreen from a bottle in her purse. "You must do a lot of boating," he said, slathering the cream over his face. "You came prepared." "Actually, this is my first voyage. I just have sensitive skin, so I keep a good sunscreen in my purse all the time." Spying a clump of cream on the side of this nose, she reached up to spread it into an even layer. Her touch was gentle but efficient, and Scott looked forward to having her touch him in other ways, and speculated on how patient he would have to be before she did. "This is my first cruise, too," he said. "I only came because of the special discount. I teach at the University of Florida." "Oh-ho," Doris said. Scott raised an eyebrow, questioning. "I hail from a long line of Seminoles," she explained. "My father still takes his original stadium blanket to football games for good luck. I suppose that makes you an FSU alum." "Undergraduated and law school." She smiled at him again. The impact of it hit him like a fist in the guts. "But I'm the rebel of the family," she assured him. "I try to keep an open mind." "Does that mean you had let a gator take you to lunch?" Lunch stretched into a leisurely walk around the decks. Dory explained that she had been given a pair of tickets for the cruise by a grateful client. "I scheduled it for today so my sister could come. She has a senior in high school, and it was supposed to be sort of a pre-graduation present. But an audition came up, so..." "Audition?" "Adelina sings," Dory said. "She is going to major in music next year." "At Florida State?" Scott guessed. Dory nodded. "Of course, it would break Father's heart if she went anywhere else." She pointed towards the flight of a gull soaring overhead. When it had diminished into a tiny dot on the horizon, she looked back at Scott. "Adelina would never break Father's heart. She's the only one who came out right." "What do you mean?" "Well, my parents named my brother Sergei for Sergei Rachmaninov, the composer. Only Sergei turned out to have a thin ear, so he had to settle for becoming a surgeon instead." "And you?" "Dory, short for Isadora, as in Isadora Duncan, the legendary ballerina. Unfortunately, I could not tell my right foot from my left foot when I started ballet class." "So you settled for becoming a lawyer?" "Just like dear old Dad, except that he has a judge now, and I am still trying to make enough profit in my practice to pay down on my first BMW." "And your sister, was she named after anyone special?" "Oh yes, Adelina Patti. She really wowed them in the opera halls in the mid-19th century. It's an old-fashioned name, but it fits Adelina perfectly. She got the looks of an angel along with all the talent." They walked and talked for hours, expressing that they had been destined to meet, to become friends, and ultimately lovers. They laughed together, rested over a sumptuous dinner, then danced on the deck in the moonlight, and later, just before the ship docked, they strolled back to the deck where they had first encountered, and Scott Rowland became the first UF Gator Dory Carroll had ever kissed. They became lovers on their third date, and since then the only distance between them had been miserable in highway miles, the 150 miles that lay between Gainesville and Tallahassee. The physical distance kept their lives just separate enough to make their time together precious. One weekend a month, Scott drove to Tallahassee to share Dory's life One weekend a month, Dory drove to Gainesville to share Scott. It worked beautifully and had for nearly 3 years. There was no crowding in their relationship, no unreasonable demands, no engaging, no histrionic clinging, no boredom, no apathy, no fights over the family budget. There were only sharing and the sheer joy of being together. Quite simply, there was no one else on earth Scott would rather be with than Dory. He loved talking to her, he loved holding her or being held by her, he loved making love to her. As the cougar ate up the highway miles, Scott speculated on the weekend ahead. Oddly enough, he and Dory seldom made plans together. Dory played hostess in Tallahassee, Scott played host in Gainesville. Surprise flourished in their relationship and breathed into it a life seldom sustained in long-lasting romance. Tonight, Dory might meet him at the door dressed to kill and ready to party in some posh little night spot she had heard about. Or she might not answer the door at all. He might find her sprawled on a pile of throw pillows in the middle of the living room floor, wearing a sexy night shirt and ready for some very private party. A heaviness settled in his lungs as he remembered past weekends and satin slip shirts with peekaboo lace applique. Dory often wore satin. It suited her, it intrigued and aroused Scott. The vinyl steering wheel grew damp under his hands as he recalled the tactile contrast of slick, smooth satin reading the backs of his hands and firm, supple female flesh under his palms. Their physical relationship was superb, explosive at times, tender at others. Years of togetherness had enabled them to learn each other's bodies, reach each other's needs, try new technique, find shared ecstasy in the most basic ways of loving. The time they spent apart enhanced the sweetness of their lovemaking. Anticipation was an aphrodisiac that heightened their needs and the excitement of their loving. As usual, the last 50 miles turned into an exquisite torture of waiting. Memories of their lovemaking flickered through Scott's mind in a string of erotic images that titillated his senses. He could feel the coolness of percale designer sheets against his back, taste wine on Dory's lips, smell her perfume. Sometimes she lit a candle that surrounded them in a fragile cloud of that fragrance and projected their shadows on the wall as they coupled. Impatience rode on Scott's shoulder until, at last, the thickening of traffic on the interstate signaled his approach to the city. He switched off the cruise control and leaned forward slightly, squinting against the glare of the sun settling like a ball of fire on the road in front of him. It was a relief to exit the freeway and turn so that the sun ball was to his side as he navigated the last mile to Dory's apartment. The aroma of cooking food reached him as he stepped into the covered alcove in front of Dory's door. An irrepressible smile curled his lips. They were dining. Dory answered the door wearing a cowl-neck sweater, cold slacks and well-worn house slippers, her thick-colored hair, which she smoothed back for the office and courtroom, curled frenziedly and untethered around her face, an indication that she had showered before changing into her casual clothes. They were dining in, staying in. That was okay with Scott. It was dinner time, and she was good company. He was hungry, and Dory was a good cook. The world was good to Scott Rowland Jr. They kissed briefly, confident that there would be time later on for passion. "Did you have an easy trip?" she asked. "Uneventful," he said, "but long. It always takes too long to get to you." He followed her to the kitchen and leaned against the counter to watch while she stirred the gravy that was simmering. "You are right on time," she said, "and then, nothing fancy tonight, meatloaf?" "Mashed potatoes and gravy," he asked. Cooked in the act of having included his favorite entree in the menu, she smiled at him. Symphonic cellists like Dory's mother taught their daughters to appreciate music, but not how to make a good meatloaf. Dory had learned to cook at the elbow of her best friend's mother, who was Southern to the core. Her basic meat, potatoes, and vegetables menu suited Scots taste perfectly. When they wanted elegance, they dined out. When they wanted good food and uncomfortable homey intimacy, they dined in. He cooked at his house, she cooked at hers. It was another of the many pieces that fit so perfectly into the larger picture of their relationship. "So how's life in Gator Country?" she asked as they sat down to eat. In addition to bank partner in CPA firm, Scott Taft part-time at his alma mater, but except for her reference to UF as Gator Country and his referral to FSU as that other school in Florida, the college rivalry caused only a teasing friction between them. Usually they made some outrageously sexy bet on the outcome of the annual UFFSU grudge football game that made both of them personal winners and rendered the question of the final score in the game entirely moot. "Typical of this time of year," Scott answered. "Everyone's still thinking football, but if you have begun to realize we are halfway into the semester, and I signed the 10 projects last week. Now the students are driving me crazy with questions about picayune details, while the average students have not even read the assignment sheet thoroughly yet. Same old routine. How about you?" "We are scheduled to provide the Burton estate this week, finally." "I know. You will be glad to get that one cleared." The Burton estate had been coming up in their conversation for months now. "We drew a reasonable judge," she said. "With luck, we can get everything cleared in a couple of hours." "Good," he said. He noticed suddenly the circles under her eyes, which her makeup did not quite hide. "You look tired." "I am," she admitted with a weary sigh. At Tough, she was relieved to get her tiredness out in the open on record. Been burning the midnight oil in the low library. She shrugged her shoulders dismissively. "A little. You work too hard." "Fine advice from a workaholic like you," she said. But he sensed a lack of conviction in her teasing, an absence of fun. She was tired, Scott Taft. She worked too hard. She always did. It was a family trait, either genetic or acquired. She had to have drive just to maintain her niche in that clan of overachievers from which she hailed. His family situation was exactly the opposite. Scott had left home determined to break out of a mold of mediocrity, to become successful in the ways that mattered: money, prestige, and meaning, especially meaning. He enjoyed financial security and the trinkets money could buy, but he valued respect most of all, especially self-respect. He had seen what happened to a man who loses his self-respect. It was not going to happen to Scott Rowland Jr. the way it had happened to Scott Rowland Sr. He looked across the table at Dory and felt love and well-being and the realization of his good fortune smelling in his chest. This woman made no emasculating demands on him. She simply loved him the way he loved her. Her strength, her independence were as appealing to him as the softness of her skin against his and the sweet scent of her hair when he buried his face in it. He loved her for that fierce self-sufficiency that was as much a part of her nature as her tendency to pamper him with tiny gestures that said, "I care about you." "What?" she asked, catching him starting at her. "I just like looking at you," he replied. "I missed you. I'm glad to see you. I think you are the sexiest woman on this continent." She grinned. "You are horny. I'm contemplating making passionate love to you right here among the mashed potatoes." "That could get messy." "It could get interesting," he countered suggestively. "I rented the movie," she said. "We could watch it afterward, with mashed potatoes in our hair, after a shower." "Eat," she said, and appraising the expression in his eyes, added with a sly smile, "Your dinner." "We could have fun in the shower," Scott argued amiably, even as he plunged his fork into his mashed potatoes. "You could watch my back." Again he felt the thick warmth gathering in his lungs as he watched the uncontrollable blush rising in her cheeks. How many visits ago was it that he was showering and she had kept him off guard and they had made love in the bathtub with the shower beating down on them? What an erotic adventure that had been! Damn the movie she had rented. He tapped. He was not in the mood for a movie, he was in the mood for Dory. Actually, he admitted to himself later it was not so bad watching the movie. Having Dory cuddled in the crook of his arm and resting her head on his chest made him feel cozy and comfortable. It was so relaxing that Dory fell asleep, and he had to nudge her awake with kisses on the forehead as the tape rewound in the VCR. "I'm going to take a shower," he said. "Want to watch my back?" Stretching, Dory shook her head and said, "I have got to get ready for bed." Her look, the kiss she dropped on his cheek, told him she was saying more than that she was going to put on her nightie and brush her teeth. Getting ready for bed? When she said it just that way and gave him that knowing look, told Scott she would also be putting in her diaphragm. She knew it. He knew it. She was waiting for him in bed when he got out of the shower, tucked between old-fashioned rose print sheets and wearing pink satin baby dolls with ribbon, teeth, and smoked yolk. She appeared very young and innocent. The effect set the tone as they made love. They came together slowly, starting with the most basic of caress under the covers, followed by gentle kisses and slow, subtle exploration of each other's bodies. They knew each other and each other's bodies well, where and how to touch, where and how to kiss, to ignite the passion that led them to the ultimate physical union and the setting of their desire. Afterward, they lay together, arms and legs untwined, still and immensely satisfied, while their breathing and their heart rate slowed to normal. At length, Dory slipped her satin pyjama threw back on and rested next to Scott on her side, pressing her back against his hips. He reached up to turn out the bedside light and then cuddled next to her, sliding one arm under her neck, circling the other around her waist, their bodies spooned together comfortably. He loved the feel of her feminine curves fitted against him, her flesh against his flesh. Her satin pyjama top was smooth and warm against his chest. He took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of her hair so close to his face. He kissed the top of her head, smiled in replete satisfaction as she snuggled closer with a contented sigh. It might have been masculine instinct, the remnant of a primitive urge to protect his woman, that made him wait for her breathing to slow into the lethargic, regular rhythm of sleep before he allowed himself to surrender wakefulness. Or perhaps he simply enjoyed the sense of well-being he felt when she was sleeping next to him. Whatever the reason, he usually waited for her to fall asleep first. Tonight, however, he waited in vain. After what seemed to be a very long time, much longer than it usually took her to drift off, he sensed that, after all, she was very still. She remained wide awake as she lay next to him. It was surprising when she had been no tired earlier. He wondered if she had even closed her eyes, and suspected that they were wide open. He became aware of an alien tension in her muscles that disturbed him. "Dory," he whispered. She made a teeny sound of acknowledgement. "Are you all right?" he asked. "There is not anything wrong, is there?" Seconds stretched into and beyond a full minute while he waited for an answer. When she finally spoke, it was in a voice so soft that it hardly qualified as a whisper, yet he heard her as easily as he would have heard us shut. "I'm pregnant," she said. كل شي مبروك.